Hey, I'm Hallie, and we're starting with that agreement between President Biden and Germany's new chancellor that if Russia crosses a line and invades Ukraine, that's a problem, that cannot be, as the president put it, business as usual. You're about to see President Biden with Olaf Scholz, the new guy in Berlin. He's taken over for Angela Merkel after 16 years, and he's been facing some questions about how committed his country actually is to trying to hold back Putin. President Biden said today there's nothing to worry about. Listen.
Germany's completely reliable, completely, totally, thoroughly reliable. I have no doubt about Germany at all.
So here's why this is important, because a U.S. official tells our team 70% of the troops Russia would need to invade are already on the border. They're already there. This official warns Kyiv in Ukraine could fall within 48 hours. And look at these numbers. Tens of thousands of people could die or get hurt, civilians and troops both. Of course, Moscow is still denying it's going to launch this full-fledged attack. They've been doing that all along. The U.S. doesn't buy it. Let me bring in Josh Letterman at the White House. Josh, a lot of headlines just in the last hour since we've seen this news conference with President Biden and the new German chancellor wrap up here. Big headline relates to something called Nord Stream 2. That's this pipeline that's co-owned by Germany and Russia. The U.S. is against it, but there was a real question coming into this. If Russia invades, would Germany pull the plug, right? Would it be dead if Russia invades? Because this is a big leverage point for Russia in these discussions. Here's what President Biden said.
If Russia invades, that means tanks or troops crossing the border of Ukraine again. Then there will be no longer a Nord Stream 2. We will bring an end to it.
But what was interesting, Josh, was like right after this, the reporter who asked that question said, well, OK, but how do you know, right? You're not really a stakeholder in this pipeline. And the president said, I promise you.
Well, certainly the U.S. can do a lot to pressure these European countries to pull the plug on this pipeline. But you're right. Ultimately, that's going to be a decision that they're going to make. And the German chancellor, despite saying that all of the steps Germany will take will be ones they take in concert with the U.S., he wouldn't even say the name of that pipeline in that news conference, nor would he go as far as to just say out loud what President Biden, standing just a few feet from him, was willing to say out loud, which was, we are absolutely going to cut this off if Russia invades. Instead, we heard the German chancellor kind of dancing around it a little bit, saying, you know, we'll all be in agreement, that we will take steps, but he would not explicitly say, which is what everybody was looking to see, whether or not he would actually address, we are going to turn that pipeline off if Russia invades. I also want to bring you some really coming into us just in the last few seconds, Hallie, some news from Moscow where President Putin has been holding a news conference after he had that meeting for hours with the visiting French leader. And Putin, according to, we're still getting this translated from Russian, but our colleagues at Reuters have put out some of the early headlines of what President Putin is saying. You could see him there as he was meeting with Macron. Putin saying that if Ukraine joins NATO, European countries will be drawn into military conflict with Russia. He says there will be no winners in that situation, but Putin insisting that Russia will do everything that it can on its side to find compromises that suit everyone, saying that they have to find a way out of this situation over Ukraine, and that Putin insisting that there are things that NATO and the U.S. Can discuss, even if they are secondary to the Ukraine crisis. So Putin not really shifting much from what has been his core position here all along. It certainly does not bode well for any kind of major diplomatic breakthrough.
Josh, you're right. That's coming to us as we are live on the air right now. What's happening with President Putin of Russia, Emmanuel Macron of France. But here's the deal. Let me just sort of pull back for a second here. This is a lot of what Vladimir Putin has been saying all along, right? He wants assurances that Ukraine will not be in NATO eventually. The U.S. is not going to give that assurance to Russia. And now there's concern on the part of the West that, hey, could this be all-out war that's about to break out with Russia putting more of its troops on the Ukrainian border? That's what everyone's kind of freaking out about. And there's been this question. Has Germany, one of our allies, right, strong NATO partner, has Germany done enough to try to act tough with Russia, right, to put up that tough front? And questions about could they be doing more to support Ukraine? That is the backdrop that the new German chancellor comes into the United States talking with President Biden right now and saying, you know, during this news conference that there is a united front.
That's exactly right. And we heard President Biden insisting we trust Germany completely. There are no doubts about the Germans. But it reminds me of that line from Hamlet, the lady doth protest too much, methinks. Like, if you've got to insist, if you've got to go out there and say, no, don't worry, we don't have any doubts about them, it might be because there's some doubts floating out around about Germany. And we even heard just a few minutes ago from Mitch McConnell, the Senate Republican leader, who says he thinks Germany can do more. Yeah. So there is bipartisan agreement that Germany, since Olaf Scholz took over, has not been the most steadfast, reliable ally when it comes to Russia.
Really quick, Josh, only because I just said, there is some real concern on the part of the U.S. and others, like, oh my gosh, there could be all-out war. Ukraine, the president there, President Zelensky, is like, hey, diplomacy's not over yet. Like, we still have a diplomatic path. And I know the White House faced some questions on that disconnect today, right? Like, and we've heard this from our reporters, our colleagues, Aaron McLaughlin, Matt Bradley, Matt Bodner, who were there in Ukraine and Russia, saying it feels different in Ukraine. It doesn't feel like such a drumbeat to war. But in reality, what the West is looking at, the U.S. and others, that is very much potentially on the horizon.
I think one of the things Ukrainians are worried about is, even short of an invasion, this panic that's setting in can have really negative effects for their economy. People don't want to invest there. President Biden said in his news conference today, American citizens in Ukraine should leave. He doesn't want them getting caught in the crossfire. So even without actually ordering an invasion, Putin is already causing damage for Ukraine, and they don't want to see that happen. But of course, the U.S. wanting to make clear to the entire world that this is a Russian military buildup in support of what looks like a potential invasion, not to be confused with what Russia is probably going to say, which is that there's some type of provocation from Ukraine and they're simply acting in self-defense.
Josh Letterman live for us there outside the White House. Josh, thank you. Let's bring it to what's going on back here at home. Mask rules in schools, they are changing fast. And that's illustrating how some people are now starting to think about COVID. This question, this hard reality, are we just going to have to live with COVID now? Is that the hard truth? In some states, in more conservative-leaning states, that's kind of been asked and answered. No more mandates there anymore, but the news tonight is now coming from two deep blue states, New Jersey, Delaware, both scrapping their mask rules for K-12 students and teachers by the end of next month. Here's New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy.
This is not a declaration of victory as much as an acknowledgement that we can responsibly live with this thing. Because we've gone through it first, we can responsibly take this step.
So what do the numbers look like when it comes to that? The good news is, in New Jersey's case, the curve looks a little like a roller coaster of great adventure. Way up because of Omicron in January. You can see it has dipped way back down now. But even though the state has one of the country's highest vaccination rates, not even a third of New Jersey's kids, ages 5 to 11, have gotten fully vaccinated. Vaughn Hilliard is in Hoboken, New Jersey now with more. The governor has done this thing where he said, okay, it's up to local districts. That's the decision. But then on the other hand, you have the federal government, the CDC, still saying, hey, we think everybody who's in these K-12 schools should still wear masks. Talk about a disconnect. That is a disconnect, right? On the one hand, the New Jersey governor trying to balance normalcy with a real threat from COVID, although it is potentially lessened in kids versus adults, et cetera. What are you hearing as you're on the ground there in Jersey, Vaughn, with that as the backdrop?
Well, the governor was the first to say, Hallie, that the New Jersey is no intention of reverting back to more mandates. He essentially suggested that over the course of these 2 years, they have been cautious to not lead people astray. At the forefront of that are these classrooms here because, well, yes, you've seen the numbers here plummet over the last 3 weeks in terms of case counts and hospitalizations. And he says this will not go effect until the second week of March. At the same time, you mentioned the vaccination rates for kids around the country, kids that are 11 to 17 years old. The vaccination rate is just 56%, about 70% here in New Jersey. But it's even lower for kids who are 5 to 11 years old. The vaccination rate around the United States is just 22%. So when I was talking with some of these parents, that is where the paramount concern is because of the extent for the major majority of their fellow classmates who remain unvaccinated.
I don't see how they can lift a mask mandate for particularly preschool students where classrooms are being shut down for a week to 10 days of healthy preschool students because of COVID.
It is without a doubt in my head that the masks have kept him safe, have kept him from testing positive any of those times he's been exposed. So I'm not too thrilled about it.
You know, and Jennifer there, Hallie, was standing with her 4-year-old who is in the preschool here at Wallace Elementary School. Kids under the age of 5 still cannot get vaccinated. And she said that is why she is frustrated, especially because of the quarantine rules at a lot of these schools, that if there is any extent of an outbreak, that kids like her own will be forced to go back to learning from home.
We know, Vaughn, and we've seen it over these last couple of years, right? Pieces of the pandemic have been politicized. And we have seen this theme. States that voted for President Biden have largely kept these school mask mandates in place. I think we can show people that. You see it here. States that largely voted for former President Trump have tried to ban or get rid of these mandates, right? This is this red versus blue divide in this country. We laid it out at the top of this segment. You now have Governor Phil Murphy making this move. He just survived a pretty tough re-election fight in November, right, in a state where some voters were trying to get rid of him. He only won by about 3 points. It was expected to be more of a landslide. This is part of that story, Vaughn, right? I mean, I think the fact that we're seeing now a very blue state run by this governor who, you know, survived this re-election fight make this move is part of this discussion.
Right, and I was in Virginia when Glenn Youngkin essentially focused almost wholly in those last weeks of his campaign on the idea of parental rights, fighting back against mandates, whether it be from masks to vaccines, suggesting that he wasn't necessarily opposed to them, but he believed that it was in the right of parents to make the decision for what is best for their students here. And that is where, you know, I talked to a teacher who walked by just after school who told me that she's concerned about what this opens up and about being unable to control what those students do at the urgings of their parents here. You know, we should know right now, if you still take into account New Jersey and Washington, D.C., the number of states which are requiring masks in schools is down to just 16 right now, Hallie.
Vaughn Hill, you're live for us there in New Jersey where those rules are changing. Vaughn, thanks. Speaking of COVID rules, those are what's behind this scene you're about to see in Ottawa, Canada today, where the police chief is now asking the city council for 1,800 more police officers to help turn up the heat, with Ottawa pretty much buckling under day 11 of these big trucker protests. You heard about these, the Freedom Convoy of truckers? They're demonstrating over COVID rules. Police say they're not backing down. They've arrested 20 people. They've issued 500 tickets so far. These protests are loud. They are very loud. Listen to what it's like. I mean, that's it. That's Ottawa. That's your vibe right there. Horns day and night, with the judge in Ottawa today granting this temporary injunction, basically saying you got to stop honking for 10 days. Again, this demonstration is being driven by this group of truckers called the Freedom Convoy. And they started protesting over a vaccine mandate to cross the border between the U.S. and Canada. But this whole thing has morphed into something bigger, this broader protest against Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and how he's handled the pandemic. You had Ottawa's mayor putting in place a state of emergency since these truckers are, in some instances, blocking streets. They're disrupting traffic. That means businesses have had to close downtown. Joining me now is Maura Backdrop. And Maura, that is the backdrop. Day 11, it is kind of a mess in Ottawa as this Freedom Convoy of truckers is coming to, as they say, they have the right to be able to protest. They want to have their voices, their horns be heard. Ottawa is saying, hey, it's pretty disruptive to do this.
The city of Ottawa is in a really serious situation right now, Hallie. Some politicians in Canada calling this, going so far as to say that this is their own version of an insurrection. Others saying that it's an occupation. Either way, the mayor saying that this is the most serious emergency that city has ever seen. And so they're trying to ramp down on what's been going on over the past 2 weeks or so. You saw that order to stop the honking. There was hundreds of arrests over the weekend, 20 arrests over the weekend and hundreds of tickets issued. And the police even went so far as being heavily armed and going to a staging area where protesters, truckers were keeping a lot of their supplies and their fuel. And the police took their fuel. And if trucks don't have fuel, obviously, Hallie, they can't really do much. And so this is just another step in the latest of this protest and the mayor and the city calling for extra support with police on top of the 2,100 staff of police officers and civilian officers that they already have in Ottawa. So that kind of paints a picture of how seriously the city's taking it right now.
And here's another piece of that picture. Didn't Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, I think he left his home downtown. I think he took him and his family because of security issues. I don't know that we know specifically where he is. What are we hearing from them?
Right, they're in an undisclosed location right now, and we have heard that he's denounced the protesters, calling them a fringe minority, the demonstrators. And it's important to note, Canada is one of the most vaccinated countries, right? 4 out of every 5 Canadians are vaccinated. So when you look at the percentage of people that are against the vaccines, against the mandates that we've seen, it is a small percentage, but it's that extreme conservative wing that we're seeing have these demonstrations cause this extreme chaos and anxiety for people in Ottawa. People are saying grocery store workers are getting spit on because they're asking people to put masks on. People are being hospitalized for anxiety. Medications aren't being delivered. And so there's a lot of disruption in the day-to-day. Justin Trudeau, though, saying that he won't repeal the vaccine mandate. And he also says he's not going to bring in Canadian military to help fight these protesters. And it is important to note right now, Hallie, while we don't know where he is, we do know that he is currently quarantining because he tested positive for COVID about a week ago.
Maura Barrett, this is obviously something that people are looking at through a political lens here in the United States, of course, especially on the conservative side. Really appreciate that, Maura. We'll be keeping an eye on that freedom convoy of truckers. But we're also talking about this new position, or at least a new announcement, a new clarification from the White House that says President Biden is looking to keep up restrictions on no-knock warrants through executive orders. It's something that's come front and center lately after Minneapolis police used one of these warrants, a no-knock warrant, to get into an apartment where 22-year-old Amir Locke was staying. He was shot 3 times by Officer Mark Hanneman. The police released the body cam video we're about to show you last week, and we have to warn you, you will find it disturbing. The video shows the officers with blurred faces. They're going into the apartment. They've got their guns drawn. Locke, according to his family, was asleep on the couch. But then you see police draw the guns. They then shoot and kill him. Minneapolis police have released a photo from the body cam. They shows Locke with a gun in his hand, a gun his family said he had a license for, a concealed carry permit for. And Locke was not the target of the warrant, according to police chief. The mayor of Minneapolis has now put in place a temporary ban on these kinds of no-knock warrants. You've seen over the weekend hundreds of people protesting the death of Amir Locke. I want to bring in Shaq Brewster, who's joining me now. So, Shaq, we heard the city council today talking about these no-knock warrants. There's about 20 to 80,000 of these done by police every year. And now you have this specific case, getting the attention again. And we've talked about no-knock warrants before in other very high-profile cases. And the White House is saying, hey, President Biden is reiterating his position. And let me be clear, it's a position that the White House says he's held about looking at the possibility of continuing to restrict these no-knock warrants. Essentially, it would be on the federal level supporting what the Minneapolis officials have done.
Yeah, that's right. And let's kind of step back and look at what the Minneapolis officials have done. They've put a moratorium or a pause on those no-knock warrants, both being requested and executed until they can go back and review the policy. They're bringing in outside experts to do what other cities have done with other high-profile cases. You think Louisville after the death of Breonna Taylor. They're trying to reform this no-knock warrant policy so that it is less dangerous. One of the reforms you hear floated is the idea that there's a 30-second wait before you enter the threshold of an apartment or of a building. So that's what they're looking at right now. And President Biden it's on his agenda now. It's something that the White House is looking at. But it's also important to note that this is also something that would have been addressed, at least partially, with that George Floyd Justice and Policing Act that failed or that didn't have any motion or any movement in Congress.
What do we know about the investigation specifically into Locke's case here?
This is an investigation that's being led by the county attorney in conjunction with the state attorney general under Keith Ellison's leadership. So they will be the ones who make the decision on whether or not there will be any charges in this case. This is an interesting case because it goes through multiple jurisdictions. It was St. Paul that requested the search warrant be filed. Minneapolis Police Department executed the search warrant. This had to do with a homicide investigation in St. Paul. So there are a lot of different jurisdictions at play. So it's going to be a little bit before we get any more information. And there are a lot of entities, a lot of groups, and a lot of different focuses, a lot of organizations or departments, that's the word I was looking for, that are involved in this investigation. So it might take some time. Yeah,
it is almost certainly going to take some time. And Shaq, I just have to think about, the feeling on the ground there for a community that's been through so much, right, over the last several years here on this issue. Shaq Brewster.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say, it's been year after year where there's been another high-profile killing. We just wrapped up the Kim Potter trial with Dante Wright. So it's another source of trauma for members of that community.
It sure is. It's an important point. Shaq, thank you very much for your reporting. To Georgia tonight, where jury selection has started in the federal hate crimes trial of the 3 men who murdered Ahmaud Arbery. And there's some concern now about whether or not they'll be able to find a full pool of fair and impartial jurors. And here's the reason. Travis and Gregory McMichael, do you remember they were going to plead guilty? It seemed like everything was pointing in that direction until the judge rejected the terms of their plea deal with the Justice Department. That just happened last week. Because of that, you now have this wide net being cast for jury selection. More than 1,000 jury notices have been mailed out across 43 counties. Blaine Alexander is outside the courthouse in Brunswick, Georgia. Blaine, explain this, right? Is this atypical for this many notices to be sent out to this many potential jurors?
Well, it's certainly going to be interesting, and it's certainly going to lead to a very long jury selection process. So I think what's interesting here, not the fact that there are about 1,000 summons or so, but just how wide this net is. You're talking about 43 counties. So just to kind of put it into context for you, Georgia's a very big state. So when you talk about 43 different counties across the Southern District, that means that some potential jurors drove as far as 4 hours just to get here today and for the jury selection process. So, you know, a couple of reasons they're doing this, and a couple of reasons this is notable, rather. One, because when you're talking just about Glenn County and Brunswick, Georgia, it's a rather small area. So when you cast a wider net, it certainly lessens the likelihood that you're going to see any sort of people who perhaps have any sort of connection to the defendants or anything like that. That said, it doesn't eliminate it altogether. Already today, we've seen at least one potential juror who says that she knows one of the defendants, William Roddy Bryan, that he did some landscaping or yard work for her. And when she was asked whether that could impact her being impartial, she said possibly. There's another potential juror who knew one of the defendants since he was a young boy. So when you're looking at the fact that, yes, you're casting a wider net, but you can't get away from the fact that there are still some people who will know the defendants. Hallie.
There's also the piece of this. This is explicitly about an involving race. These are federal hate crimes charges, which means the question in front of the jury is going to be, was this racially motivated? These now people who have been convicted of murder, was that the impetus here? And we were just showing some graphics on screen, and I want to explain that. The backdrop is what happened during the state trial, right? Jury selection lasted 3 weeks. Only one of the 12 jurors was black in a county that is 27% black. And that, Blaine, I think is important context to looking at how this federal jury will be put together and what its makeup is.
Yeah, I think that when you talk about the optics here, there's certainly going to be a lot of attention paid to the racial makeup of this jury. In fact, there was one potential juror, you know, because race is such a big piece of all of this, that's going to be part of the questioning. That's going to be part of what people look at when they watch this trial. No matter which way the verdict goes in the end, there's certainly going to be questions about what the jury, how the racial breakdown was. There was one man, an African-American man, who said that he did believe that he would have a hard time being impartial just because of the fact that race was so present in all of this. The other thing I want to talk about, Hallie, is the evidence. Remember, prosecutors have the burden of essentially proving that race played a role, that there was racial animus, that they made an assumption when they saw Ahmaud Arbery running that day. They made an assumption about him based on the color of his skin, and that's what led them to ultimately chase him down and kill him. So we expect to see text messages, we expect to see Facebook posts, a number of different things that prosecutors have alluded to that they're going to try and introduce that they say shows that sort of racial animus on behalf of the defendants. Hallie.
Blaine Alexander, live for us there in Brunswick, Georgia. Blaine, thank you. Appreciate you being there for us tonight. Coming up, you know the Chinese tennis star Peng Shuai. She's got her first interview now with a Western outlet, a non-Chinese outlet, saying again she never made this sexual assault allegation against a top government official. On top of that, she's saying she's retiring. Janice Mackey-Freyer is in China with the latest twist in the saga. The Women's Tennis Association says it's still worried about Peng Shuai, the Chinese tennis star who, remember, accused a former Chinese vice premier of sexual assault. It's coming after Peng gave her first interview to a newspaper not tied to Chinese state media. And in that interview, she denies making the accusation once again. Peng Shuai turned up at the figure skating competition in Beijing over the weekend and told a French newspaper the accusations against Zheng Gaoli on a social media post that was deleted not long after it was put up were, in her words, a huge misunderstanding. She says, "I never said anyone had sexually assaulted me in any way." She also dismissed any questions in this interview at the newspaper that she disappeared after the post. An international story, the disappearance of Peng Shuai, but she says, "I wasn't disappeared. It was just very impossible to answer so many messages." We can't talk about this enough. This was like an international siren after the post was deleted, and then she went off the radar, it seemed, for almost 3 weeks. A lot of people were wondering, was China silencing her? We'd like to add, NBC News could not reach Galilee for comment. I want to bring in Janice Mackey-Freyer, who's been following this story for us since the beginning. She is joining us now from Beijing. And Janice, let me start with this. The Women's Tennis Association that pulled tournaments out of China because they were so worried about her safety. And this interview, again, first one to a non-Chinese state media outlet, hasn't changed their position at all.
Well, because nothing has changed, Hallie. I mean, in the eyes of the Women's Tennis Association, they're still not able to speak with Peng Shuai independently. They've had no guarantee or explanation of why they can't reach her. So as far as the WTA is concerned, there is still no independent proof that she is safe and able to speak freely. The WTA putting out another statement today saying, look, it's great to see Peng Shuai, whether in an interview or attending the Olympics. The statement goes on to say, however, her recent in-person interview does not alleviate any of our concerns. They're talking about the need, of course, for some sort of formal investigation into the allegations that she made in that initial post. Now, in this interview, Hallie, she didn't address a lot of what happened around the accusation and the days and the weeks that followed when she was out of public view. But she does claim that she was the one who deleted that social media post.
And then says she just got too busy afterwards to like show up and you know, make an appearance when this was an international firestorm, Janice. The back and forth and the backstory and how these journalists from this French outlet actually got this interview is fascinating. I mean, listen, Peng Shuai was accompanied by essentially a Chinese handler to the interview. They had to go and get permission, obviously, in advance. They said they did it through the Chinese, and that the Chinese told them, you're the only paper that requested an interview. So we took your request seriously, which is why we considered it.
Well, it follows the pattern that we've seen with this story over the past several months. Whenever Peng Shuai does reappear, it's in a very orchestrated way. She's at an event. She's talking to people, but we don't hear her. We see her out and about. She's having fun, eating dinner with her friends. We don't hear her. Whenever we have heard her, it's been in a very orchestrated, tightly coordinated way. This interview happened in an Olympic Committee hotel room within the Beijing closed loop. So not possible to try and permeate except for any journalists inside. And of course, with Chinese officials around her doing translation. I've talked to people in the past who said, you know, Peng Shuai spent years on the international circuit. She knows how to speak English. She can handle her own in an interview, but still we see her surrounded by this team that gets her through these different appearances. Now, the IOC is still maintaining its position in that they believe that that nobody should be judging anything, that they did not believe that she was under duress. Here's what officials had to say today.
I don't think it's a judgment for the IOC to make. We are a sporting organisation, and our job is to remain in contact with her, and as we've explained in the past, to carry out personal, quiet diplomacy.
One other point on the interview, Hallie, that I think is worth making. Yeah. They were very open in their piece saying, look, we wanted to talk to Peng Shuai. Who doesn't want to talk to Peng Shuai? So they put in the request. The question is, why this French newspaper? It's a sports newspaper, so it's one that would appeal to her. But also, France was one of the countries that did not join the diplomatic boycott of these Olympics. So there could be a nod to France in making that decision, in awarding this interview to them.
Such an interesting point. Janice Mackey-Freyer live for us in Beijing. Janice, thanks for staying on top of this story for months for us. Appreciate it. After the break, a city on the brink of war. Aaron McLaughlin takes us inside Kyiv to show us how folks there are getting ready for a potential attack from Russia. Plus, a mega merger set to create the 5th largest airline in the U.S. So how cheap will your tickets really be? We got those details coming up in the 5 Things. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, the National Archives took 15 boxes of White House records Not from the White House, but from that building you just saw, Mar-a-Lago, where former President Trump lives now. In a statement, the agency says they took those boxes last month, that they should have been handed over at the end of Mr. Trump's presidency. The agency also stressed how important the presidential records are and how important that Presidential Records Act is for a safe democracy. Number 2, New Orleans Saints player Alvin Kamara arrested on a battery charge after playing in this weekend's Pro Bowl. Officials say, and in their words, an incident happened the night before the game at a club in Vegas. The running back was arrested right after he played. He made an appearance in court today. Number 3, 2 luxury cruise ships seized by the feds in the Bahamas over unpaid fuel. The company Crystal Cruises apparently did not pay $4.6 million in gas bills. Only crew members were on board when the boats were taken in. The passengers had already been taken off. Number 4, Spirit and Frontier Airlines have agreed to merge in a $6.6 billion deal. That would make this Spirit Frontier conglomerate the 5th largest airline in the country. At the same time the deal was announced, more than 100 Frontier Airline flights were canceled just because of a tech issue. Number 5, have you noticed avocados are more expensive at the store? You're not hallucinating. A box of avocados from Mexico's biggest exporter to the U.S. costs $6 more now than it did last year. It's happening right before the Super Bowl. Did you know the Super Bowl is the biggest day of avocado consumption in the country? A lot of your produce aisle is facing those price hikes, too, over production costs and labor shortages. Everybody's eating guac for the Super Bowl, I guess. Back to developments now on the crisis in Ukraine. As world leaders try to figure out their next move, people in Kyiv are getting ready for the worst. U.S. intelligence is warning Kyiv could fall in a matter of days if Russia does actually invade, a full-scale invasion, tanks and troops over the border. We talked about the potential number of Ukrainians killed, 25 to 50,000, but some families there say they do not plan on leaving, even though they're on the brink of war with Russia. Instead, regular folks are learning how to protect their country. They're getting trained on how to handle weapons, how to give first aid, and how to help evacuate anybody who gets hurt. Our Aaron McLaughlin talked to people there about how they're getting ready to try to resist potential invasion. Watch.
With Ukraine on the brink of war, residents in Kyiv prepare for the worst. With an estimated 30,000 Russian troops amassed just hours outside the city in nearby Belarus, these ordinary citizens say they're well aware of the Russian threat on their doorstep and are ready to do whatever it takes.
Of course, I'm ready to fight for my country. What should I do? What else have I? What are the options?
Alina Ulyanova is here with her teenage sons.
Are you scared for your family? We are all mortals. Come on, we are all going to die someday, and the thing you can do is you can live your life in dignity or not.
Young and old gathering on this cold Sunday morning, learning to handle weapons, administer first aid, and evacuate the wounded.
They're learning potentially life-saving skills. Many here say they hope it doesn't come to this, but they're prepared to defend their homeland.
One elderly man warning if the Russians invade, he'll shoot. Putin is just a small and dumb guy in world history, he says. He's picked the wrong battlefield. According to one poll, half said they were ready to resist a possible Russian invasion. Ukraine's former defense minister says he believes that much resistance could be a critical deterrent, saying the Russian troops surrounding Ukraine may be enough to take a city such as Kyiv, but it's not enough to hold it.
And that's where the Russian problem is how they potentially going to keep any territories they acquire.
Small comfort to those who say they believe an invasion is inevitable. Local restaurant owner Leonid Ostaltsev fought on the front lines in eastern Ukraine, now offering free pizza to anyone who legally buys a gun to become a, quote, defender.
We live in it for 8 years. We understand that our neighbors are insane, and for me, invasion of Russia, it's a question only about time when it will be, but it will be.
Across the capital, they're dusting off Cold War-era bomb shelters, originally built by the Soviets to withstand an American nuclear attack. Now the protector has become the enemy, and the enemy the protector. An irony not lost on Mykolai Boyko, who is charged with getting the shelters ready. The shelter was planned to protect not just from bombing, but from a nuclear explosion, he says. It was built to last for centuries. Even though 17-year-old Bagli Andriy is too young to remember Soviet times, he says he knows what's at stake. For me, it means freedom, dignity. It means independence from anyone else, he says. To fight for my country, for my family, for my homeland, I'm ready to go to the very end. While the U.S. says Russia could attack at any time, Ukrainian military experts say they're eyeing February 20th. That is when Russian military exercises are scheduled to end in Belarus. Will those Russian forces stay or will they go? Noting that Russia could escalate the situation at any time. Hallie?
Aaron McLaughlin reporting for us there. Aaron, thank you. Still ahead, a dramatic rescue on Lake Erie after the sheet of ice broke off with people on it. Ugh, we got more details coming up on The Local. Plus, there's been a ton of headlines about this digital world, about the metaverse. So you know what all the hype's about? We're getting into it after the break. NBC News covers hundreds of stories every day, and because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. From our West Coast bureau, one person has been killed and another hurt after a grocery store shooting in Richland, Washington. Police are still looking for the person who did it. They say that man is armed and dangerous. Schools in the area had to go on lockdown because of this whole thing. No word yet on potential motive. Also from our West Coast bureau, the Colorado fire in Big Sur out in California is now 100% contained. We've been following this story since the fire started last month. Officials there say it burned more than 680 acres, but luckily nobody has been reported dead, nobody reported hurt from this fire. And from our Midwest bureau, look at this. 18 people were rescued from a sheet of ice floating on Lake Erie. Apparently, this whole chunk of ice broke off from the shoreline off Ohio. Crew members were on a Coast Guard helicopter. They were in the area. They saw this group stranded. Luckily, they were all brought back to dry land. Nobody was hurt, but that is certainly a couple scary moments for those folks. So Facebook, a.k.a. Meta, has launched a new safety feature in its Metaverse, Horizon Worlds. It's called Personal Boundary. It's a new feature that basically puts a 4-foot bubble of personal space around avatars, these little cartoon-looking like things, these players inside the Metaverse. Why are they doing this? Well, it's not COVID-related in the Metaverse. It's literally to prevent people from having unwanted encounters, because reports of virtual sexual harassment on their platform recently came up. We're going to talk tomorrow more about Meta's Horizon World safety issues, how they're trying to address them in the Metaverse. But we figured you might have the question, wait a sec, Hal, what is the Metaverse? Should I get into the Metaverse? Do I need to know about the Metaverse? We're taking you inside the Metaverse. So you've probably heard a lot lately about the Metaverse.
Metaverse.
The Metaverse.
The Metaverse.
The Metaverse, a series of virtual reality universes. Beyond this one, worlds where developers promise almost anything is possible. And yes, there are multiple versions of the Metaverse. Video games like Roblox already offer a Metaverse experience where developers all over the world can code and design it. You create yourself an avatar and you go and do things, like maybe you hang out with friends in some ancient ruins. You can even buy things with cryptocurrency, like real estate, virtual real estate. And since you own that land inside the virtual world, you can build virtual buildings on it. The Metaverse isn't new, but it got more popular during the pandemic. Roblox, for example, says it saw 32.5 million daily users in 2020. 1 year later, that number was spiking to 50 million in 180 countries. That popularity spike caught the eye of big tech companies.
Our company is now Meta.
Like Facebook, which rebranded its parent company to Meta and is already investing billions. They're launching their own virtual reality world called Horizon Worlds, with the promise of a socially interactive world you can create and explore in. And even smaller companies are ditching their pandemic Zoom calls for conferences in the virtual world, like Allseated, where you can hold company meetings in their metaverse. It's up to you to decide where you want to go. And in the Metaverse, the options are endless. We're going to have more tomorrow night on the Metaverse with our Maura Barrett. But we have other news tonight to get to, too, including what we recently told you about, the IRS plan to require you to scan your face for access to your account on their site. Well, that raised some real privacy concerns. So today, the IRS says, our bad, we're not actually going to do it. Instead, they're transitioning away. This is their speak here. They're transitioning away from using a third-party service for facial recognition. You had Democratic and Republican senators, security experts, people across the spectrum were worried about the fact that the government had this $86 million contract with the private company ID.me to use facial recognition to confirm your identity online. It's going to happen. This is going to get phased out over the next few weeks to try to prevent even more disruptions during tax season. Tonight, speaking of things going down in Washington, there's a new push to stop members of Congress from making money off trading individual stocks, and that new push is coming from members of Congress. The bill, introduced by 2 Democratic senators, would ban lawmakers from trading individual shares of public companies. Here's the deal. It basically keeps them from making money off of inside information only they could have access to, working on the Hill. Just last year, members of Congress and their families bought more than $260 million in assets and sold more than $360 million. This new potential proposal would make lawmakers and their families put any stock investments they own into blind trusts. That basically takes away the conflict of interest piece. It has bipartisan support, and our Ali Vitale has more on it. Watch.
Representatives Abigail Spanberger and Chip Roy aren't usually fighting on the same side.
I heard that the only thing that you guys have in common might be UVA basketball and banning lawmakers from trading stocks. Is that true?
We actually share a birthday.
And a birthday.
This political odd couple embodies the bipartisan battle being waged against corruption in Congress by Congress. Lawmakers are prohibited from insider trading, but there's nothing to stop them from investing in stocks. It became a problem in the early months of the pandemic when the Department of Justice opened probes into senators from both parties for alleged insider trading, a scandal that cost Republican Senator Richard Burr the gavel on the powerful Intelligence Committee. That's when Roy and Spanberger started talking.
So we're voting on this stuff every single day, and yet people are buying and selling stocks or buying and selling Pfizer while we're in the middle of a pandemic? Like, how is that okay?
But then our conversation was, isn't it just sad that the response within the public sphere is, oh, yeah, of course, look what they're doing.
Across the Capitol, Senator John Ossoff shares the sentiment.
It's really simple. Members of Congress should not be playing the stock market.
Now they're spearheading efforts at reform, barring lawmakers from buying or selling individual stocks while in Congress, meaning they'd have to sell their holdings or put them in a blind trust. 75% of Americans back the concept. And renewed momentum here after a recent report found 54 members violated laws designed to prevent conflicts of interest and insider trading in 2021. Last year alone, Congress and their immediate families bought over $260 million in assets and sold more than $360 million. Still, some lawmakers in both parties bearish on the efforts.
To give a blanket attitude of we can't do this and we can't do that because we can't be trusted, I just don't buy into that. But if members want to do that, I'm okay with that.
I think what we're doing works. I follow the rules. Others follow the rules. I don't find where all these people are making millions of dollars. I just don't.
Even as others remain bullish.
There's only 535 of us, right? There's 330 million Americans.
Yeah.
If you really hate that you can't day trade, all right, peace out, head home.
That does it for us this hour. We're going to have more for you here tomorrow, same time, same place. And we should tell you, too, we want to thank you because you, the viewers, made it happen. A billboard in Times Square promoting our show and others on NBC News Now. Does this mean we're big time? Does this mean I have to talk like a news anchor? I hope not. But we're so glad you're along for the ride, gang. See you tomorrow.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.